Welcome to today's workshop. I'm Meredith Hastings. I'm the president of the Earth Science Women's Network. If you're not familiar with the Earth Science Women's Network, I encourage you to check out our website, which I will put in the chat right now. We're an organization that is dedicated to increasing diversity in the geosciences, and we've worked with NSF for a long time to try to offer these types of workshops, especially aimed at early career researchers. So I'm delighted today to introduce Laura Lautz and Alexandra Eisern, who will introduce things from the NSF side. And I'm just really excited that you all are joining us today. And I think that, sorry, I'm getting distracted by, we're still having some issues with making sure we can get more people on, and we will get that figured out. One last logistical thing, we do have one of our hosts has, her name is Questions at ESWN. So throughout, throughout this workshop, if you have any issues with Zoom, or if you need to, if you want to ask questions, you can feel free to just in the chat send questions to Questions at ESWN directly, and she will collect those all. And we have a great program for you for this afternoon. So I'm going to turn things over to Laura and Alex.
Thanks, Meredith. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Alex Eisern, who leads the Geosciences Directorate. And I think for time, Dr. Eisern, I'll pass it along to you to welcome everyone, and then we'll kick off the workshop.
Thank you all, and thank you for giving me a chance to say hello and to welcome you to today's workshop on behalf of NSF. This is always an excellent activity that I think all the participants are going to find very useful. I know we find it useful interfacing with all the participants and hearing your questions and concerns. It helps us to better understand what some of the challenges are facing folks that are interfacing with NSF. I'd first like to give my sincere thanks to the workshop organizers, Meredith, Karen, Remat, and Laura, for making this happen. This is just such a great activity, and we just so enjoyed getting to meet everyone and participating. We realized at NSF that the past couple of years have been really filled with a lot of challenges, one of which is that it's been hard to bring people together in person. But we're really confident that even though this workshop is being held remotely, that you're going to gain a lot from the time that you're committing. Today, you're going to have the opportunity to share ideas, make professional connections, and learn more about NSF's priorities, its programs, and also to meet many of our excellent staff. So our staff's they'll cover the basics of NSF grants and peer review process. And I guess if I can leave you with one thing, that's that I really, really encourage you, ask a lot of questions and get to know the NSF program officers. They're fantastic. They love talking to you, and they love meeting and interacting with you. And the more interactive this session is, the more insights you're going to gain, and the more worthwhile the time is going to be. So workshops such as these are one of the many ways that the Earth Science Women's Network helps to work on inclusivity and broadening participation in STEM. So again, I think that's going to be a really important part of the discussion today. So I don't want to take a lot of time. You've got a lot to talk about, but thanks again for being here, and have a great workshop.
Thank you, Dr. Eisern. Thank you so much for welcoming everyone. I am going to kick things off. We have a presentation to start things out, and I'm just wondering for our ESWN host if I should go ahead and get started with the presentation. Yeah, I just want to take a moment to thank Dr. Eisern again for joining us today and for providing a warm welcome and being flexible as we try to navigate some of the technical challenges of doing all this remotely. But the great thing is remote participation allows for a lot more participation, so it's great to see folks here joining the call. So to everyone out there in our virtual audience, I want to extend a really warm welcome to the Navigating NSF workshop. I also want to thank the Earth Science Women's Network for hosting, and in particular, Corrine Ardendryer, Remat Bhatia, and Meredith Hastings for all the organizing that's happening behind the scenes. For those who don't know me, I'm Laura Lautz. I'm a program officer in the Hydrologic Sciences program in the Division of Earth Sciences in the Geosciences Directorate at NSF, and I'm going to be emceeing today's workshop. The workshop has three parts. First, a brief overview of NSF and the Geosciences Directorate. Second, a Q&A session with 5 of my esteemed colleagues, program officers across the Geosciences Directorate. And then finally, as much time as we can for breakout rooms, where all of you will have an opportunity to meet in small groups. We have a number of NSF program officers here to talk about specific programs and opportunities that may interest you. Next slide. Thank you. So just a brief introduction to the National Science Foundation. Of course, there are many agencies across the federal government that support science and engineering research and development, including NASA, NIH, and NOAA, and NSF is one of these federal agencies. And we support fundamental hypothesis-driven scientific research, education, and training. Next slide. Thank you. Although NSF is a relatively small agency compared to NIH, DOE, or DOD, we have a big impact on US-based science and engineering research because we have a very low overhead. And so this means that 95% of the funding that NSF receives goes out the door for grants in research, research facilities, and education. Next slide. NSF is comprised of 7 directorates, each of them shown here, and each directorate supports research and education in different scientific domains. Each directorate is headed by an assistant director, and so you just moments ago met Dr. Alex Eisern, who's the assistant director for geosciences. And each of these directorates is further subdivided into divisions and offices. So in the case of GEO, and we could advance one more slide. In the case of GEO, there are 5 divisions and offices. There's Earth Sciences, Ocean Sciences, Polar Programs, and Atmospheric and Geospace Sciences, as well as ICER, which is a part of the directorate that supports integrative and collaborative programs across geosciences and NSF, such as DICES or the Coastlines and People program. Next slide. If you're looking for research or education funding from NSF, a first key step is to find a program that aligns with your interests and the scope of the project that you want to propose. You can do this by going to the NSF website, which is shown here, and you can browse the web pages for each of the directorates. So if you click on research areas, you'll see the list of directorates that I just mentioned. In each case, if you click on the hyperlink, you'll open the website for that division, or I'm sorry, that directorate, and then you can look at the different disciplinary programs and integrative programs across those different divisions. You can review their program descriptions to understand the kind of research that's funded by each program. You can also click on the funding menu to access a number of search tools. So for that, we can go to the next page, or next slide. So when you click on funding, you're taken to this page, and there's a couple different search tools I wanted to highlight for you. First, there's of course the very tempting hyperlink to search for funding. When you click on this, you can enter keywords and pull up relevant programs. So for example, if you used groundwater as a search term, you might come up with my program, Hydrologic Sciences. But I also strongly encourage you to use this Search Previous Awards tool. In this tool, you can search by keywords. And when you search by keywords, it'll pull up currently active awards or expired awards at NSF that share those keywords. And I find this is a really great way to find existing projects that cover similar topics to what you're interested in proposing. And then you can see what programs have funded those previous projects. And I will say internally at NSF, when I'm trying to find programs that fund certain topics, this is usually my first step, is to going and searching like existing awards and who's funding different types of research. Next slide. Once you've found a program from which you'd like to solicit funding, the next step is to prepare a proposal. When you're ready to submit a proposal, the first thing you want to do is familiarize yourself with 2 really important documents. The first is the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or the PAPG. And the PAPG contains a lot of information on all the requirements for NSF proposal submissions. It includes who's eligible to submit proposals, what's allowed in NSF budgets. It describes all the various required documents and supplementary information you're asked to include, and it also outlines the NSF review process. So if you have a question, I can almost guarantee the answer can be found in the PAPG. Even when I have a question about NSF rules, I go to the PAPG. So I encourage you to browse this document to learn about the rules for submitting proposals to NSF. Next slide. The next key document is the program solicitation. So you can see the cover page for the Hydrologic Sciences program solicitation here. I'll have to say some programs don't actually have solicitations. They're guided by program descriptions that describe the scope of the program. If a program doesn't have a solicitation, then all the rules for submitting a proposal are spelled out in the PAPG. But when a program does have a solicitation, then the solicitation information augments the PAPG and provides additional guidance for how to submit a proposal to that program. Content in the solicitation includes things like whether the program has a deadline, what that deadline is. Maybe it doesn't have a deadline and you can submit proposals anytime. It'll describe the program scope so you can see if your project fits. You can find the current contact information for program directors in that program, see if you're eligible, what budget limitations there might be, whether a pre-proposal or a letter of intent is required before a full proposal submission, and how much money each program has on an annual basis and how many awards they might make in a given year. Next slide. So once you have your program of interest, you might also consider what type of proposal best suits your research and educational goals. So at NSF, there are several different types of proposals, and this slide shows some of the most common ones that we see in the geosciences. So in addition to standard research proposals that support hypothesis-driven research and provide scientific training, there are rapid proposals. These are used to propose collecting data in response to an urgent event like a natural disaster or anthropogenic event. There are goalie proposals that aim to stimulate collaboration between academic researchers and industry. You could submit a conference proposal where you're trying to bring together experts to discuss recent findings or expose other researchers or students to new research and education techniques. And perhaps you've heard of research coordination networks. These are not for collecting primary data, but rather bringing communities together to foster synthesis and develop new collaborations and advance science and education through the communication and sharing of ideas. This is the list of many of the most common proposal types in GEO, but there are others as well, and you can find them all described in the PAPG and under different program solicitations. It's important to keep in mind that not all programs support all proposal types, so it's always good to reach out to a program officer with questions about whether a given proposal is appropriate for a given program. And some of these actually require you to get an invitation from a program officer before you could submit a proposal of this type. Next slide. As you prepare your proposal, it's important to keep in mind the criteria against which your proposal will be evaluated. And all proposals at NSF are reviewed according to the two NSF merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. The intellectual merit is the potential of the project to advance knowledge and understanding, and broader impacts is the potential of the project to benefit society. It's important to know that both criteria are to be given full consideration during the review and decision-making process, and that each one is necessary and neither by itself is sufficient for making an award. Next slide. When evaluating NSF proposals, reviewers, and those could be ad hoc reviewers or panelists, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but the reviewers are asked to consider these 5 questions about the project. The first question draws specific attention to the intellectual merit and broader impacts review criteria, the potential to advance knowledge and benefit society, and the remaining questions that are about transformative potential, creativity, reasonableness of the work plan, qualifications of the team, and whether required resources are available. These apply to evaluation of both the intellectual merit and the broader impacts of what's proposed. Next slide. The intellectual merit we see in NSF-supported research is substantial, and it manifests itself in a variety of ways: increased rigor, new data, new methodologies, new ways of understanding questions of scientific importance. We also get questions about the broader impacts review criteria and what that criteria means, what types of activities have potential to benefit society in the way NSF envisions. And there are many ways that this can be accomplished. Some of them are shown here. So for example, you might propose a project that includes effective and evidence-based approaches to improve teaching, training, and learning from the K through 12 through postdoctoral levels. Your proposal might have strategies for broadening participation of communities underrepresented in the geosciences. And we know this is an area of much needed improvement in our fields of study. You might develop partnerships with industry, federal agencies, or non-academic partners, or engage in outreach beyond the classroom to settings like science museums or through social media. You could even enhance infrastructure in the form of new laboratory facilities or development of new cyber infrastructure and other societal impacts like informing policy decisions or engaging stakeholders. Next slide. Please note that it is better to do one or two of these things really well than trying to cover them all. So this list is certainly not meant to be a checklist for broader impacts. And also not every PI or every institution is well suited for all of these different potential impacts. So it's important to play to your strengths when you're preparing a proposal. And you should keep in mind that activities specifically targeted at broader impacts should be integrated and meaningful and not tacked on as like an afterthought or just a side part of the project. Next slide. So bear with me, Meredith, we have to click through this slide a little bit. So this slide shows the process that proposals go through, the merit review process. So once you submit a proposal to NSF, it goes through the gold standard of peer review before we make a funding decision. And this is going to show you the timeline and why it can take 6 months or more from when you submit a proposal to when you get a response. So you could advance one. So a proposal comes in to NSF, and you could advance one more. The first thing we do is a compliance check. And here we're simply making sure that the proposal you've submitted is compliant with the PAPG and the solicitation that I mentioned earlier. So like, is it a fit to the program? Have you included all the required materials? Have you satisfied those requirements? Okay, you can advance. If your proposal is not compliant, it can be returned without review, in which case you'd get a very quick response that the proposal needed to address some compliance issues before being reviewed. You can advance. If the proposal is compliant, it goes through the merit review process. And the merit review process could consist of ad hoc review, panel review, or both. An ad hoc review is when a proposal is sent out to experts with specific domain expertise. They're asked to review one proposal, rate it, and evaluate it using the questions I spoke about in the earlier slide. And then that information is returned to NSF, and we use it in our program evaluation. A proposal could also go to panel, where there's a group of experts. It could be a panel of 8 people, 20 people. They're evaluating a group of proposals. 20 proposals, 50 proposals could be reviewed by an individual panel. And they're looking at the proposals relative to one another and providing a relative ranking. Some programs do both. So they solicit ad hoc reviews, and then those ad hoc reviews are used to inform the panel discussion. Regardless of whether a program does ad hoc only, panel only, or both, a minimum of 3 pieces of independent information are required before a program officer can make their evaluation. You can go to the next. So all that information feeds into the program evaluation. Program officer reviews all that material and makes a recommendation to either recommend an award or recommend a decline. Next. It's important to keep in mind that the program makes a recommendation, then has to be concurred by the division director. So if you remember, there are several divisions within geosciences. The director of a given division will review the PO recommendation, and if they concur, in the case of a decline, you could advance. In the case of a decline, then the decision becomes immediately effective, and the organization and the PI receive notice that the award has been declined, and they receive all of the review materials. Next. Of course, the outcome everyone's hoping for is that an award will be recommended. And in that case, the award recommendation goes to the Division of Grants and Agreements. They have 30 days to process the award, at which time the organization would be notified and an award would be made. You can advance. And that's the proposal timeline. All right, thank you. So the program, sometimes there are questions about program level decision making and recommendations that are used that are informed by the merit review of intellectual merit and broader impact. But there's also a desire for what we call portfolio balance. And by portfolio balance, we mean a goal of recommending a portfolio of awards at the program level that address an appropriate distribution of topical areas that are within the scope of the program. We want to support a diverse portfolio of PI demographics, institution types, geography, and career stage. And we want to take advantage of opportunities to fund meritorious proposals that might include unique partnerships or support PIs and institutions that have strong records of mentorship and impact. Next slide. Okay, so now that you have an overview of the NSF programs and review process, I want to draw your attention to a couple of programs across a few different career stages that may be of particular interest. And this will be brief for time, but you could ask more questions about these programs as the workshop continues. There are programs that cross all career stages at NSF, from the undergraduate level to the most senior scientists. If you're an undergraduate, and this is also important for those of you who advise undergraduates, if you're an undergraduate, you might consider applying to participate in a Research Experiences for Undergraduates program. This is the RU program. RU sites support active research participation by undergraduate students through NSF-funded programs at different universities. And these are across the country, some are even international. You can learn about the programs by going to the website shown, or you can even Google, NSF RU. It'll take you to the website, and you can review what the different RU programs are and how to apply for a summer experience. Next slide. At the graduate level, so this is the master's and PhD level, there's the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. If you are a senior in an undergraduate program or a first or second year graduate student, you may be eligible to apply for this program. The GRFB provides 3 years of financial support that can be spent over a 5-year period, and it's for students pursuing either a research-based master's degree or a PhD. And you actually don't need to know where you're going to graduate school to apply. The fellowship is awarded to you as an individual, and then you take it to the program that you choose to matriculate into. The GRFP award is portable, so fellows, if you receive a master's degree, you use your GRFP during your master's program, you can actually continue your fellowship in a PhD program at a different institution if you wish. And in order to apply, you provide written statements, including a research statement demonstrating your potential, but the topic is actually not binding. So you can propose a research topic and then adapt, as you matriculate into your given degree program. Okay, next slide. At the career stages beyond the PhD, we have a few different programs that I'm guessing will be of interest to many of you. There's the Postdoctoral Research Fellowship Program. We actually have postdoctoral research fellowship programs now in all of the GEO divisions and offices. These are 2-year fellowships with a stipend that ranges depending on the program that you apply to, and some amount of money available for related research expenses. At the untenured early career investigator stage, we have the Career Award Program, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide. And then at the tenured associate professor level, we have a new program called Mid-Career Advancement Awards. These are intended to fund sabbatical-like experiences to advance research of mid-career or associate professor faculty. They're 2 years in duration. They include 6.5 months of salary for the PI, $100,000 in research and training expenses, among other things. You can find the details in the solicitation for that program. Next slide. So many folks are interested to hear about the career program. This is the Faculty Early Career Development Program. It's a prestigious program, a competitive program aimed at helping junior faculty develop activities that integrate research and education. So that's a key factor. It's the integration of research and education, and the content or the goals should be consistent with the goals of the organization where you're working and your own career goals. They're 5-year awards, single PI awards. There's, interestingly, a minimum rather than a maximum budget request of $400,000 In the Office of Polar Programs, it's a bit higher. And you need to be on a tenure track or equivalent appointment at the rank of assistant professor to apply. Next slide. So the short time we have today, this presentation is just the tip of the iceberg of information on NSF, GEO, and the merit review process. As you develop questions beyond those I covered in this short presentation, the best point of contact is an NSF program officer, or sometimes program director. Those are synonyms. Program officers or program directors are in a very good position to answer the questions you have or to figure out who can answer the question you have. So you might ask a program officer if your idea is a good fit for their program. You might need clarification on the PAPG or the content of the solicitation. You might ask about other programs that might be appropriate for your research if it's not a fit for the particular program. And I really encourage you, if you'd like to be considered as an ad hoc reviewer or panelist, you can reach out to a program officer to express your interest to see if you can get experience reviewing proposals, which is one of the best ways to learn about writing proposals. Next slide. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation, and we started a little bit behind time, so I want to move quickly into our panel. Yeah, speaking of getting questions answered by program officers, we're now going to move to this Q&A session. For the panel, I encourage you to enter questions in the chat. With my web browser interface, I don't have a great view of the chat, but I certainly see that the chat is being populated with lots of comments and questions, so I look forward to seeing those. You can put them directly into the chat, or you can direct them to questions@ESWN. If you'd like to remain anonymous, you can submit them directly there. We have 5 program officers that are joining us for the panel discussion. Okay, so I can't see everyone's faces. Hopefully you can see everyone. We have Dr. Soumaya Belmecheri from Atmospheric and Geospace Sciences. Dr. Belmecheri is a program officer in the Paleoclimate program and also the Paleo Perspectives on Climate Change, or P2C2 program. We have Dr. Hedy Edmonds here from Ocean Sciences, who's a program director in chemical oceanography. We have Dr. Michael Jackson from the Office of Polar Programs, who's a program officer in Antarctic research. Dr. Brandon Jones, who's from the ICER portion of geosciences, which I mentioned earlier, who wears many hats, including being a program officer for the Geoscience Opportunities for Leadership in Diversity, or GOLD program, and the GeoPaths program, which is aimed at improving undergraduate STEM education across all of the geosciences. And Dr. Jennifer Wade from the Division of Earth Sciences. She is a program officer in petrology and geochemistry. So I'm going to kick things off. I really appreciate that many of you submitted questions when you registered for the workshop. And so there were some very common questions, and I'm going to kick things off with those as we start seeing questions come into the chat. So the first question that a lot of you asked was pretty broad, but the question is, what advice would program officers, what advice would you give to PIs on how to write a compelling proposal? Are there strategies that impress panelists and reviewers? Are there common pitfalls in proposal writing? And I'm going to invite Jennifer Wade to kick it off with an initial answer to this question.
Sure. So I feel like we could do a whole hour on this topic in addition, but I'll try to give you the highlights because it's a great question. There are definitely some common mistakes, right? I'll start there. So common mistakes that we see include that the work is really just too close to what's been done before, right? It's kind of an incremental advance. It's not clear how it's going to advance the science, or that the techniques and the methodology themselves aren't cutting edge. The project might have too large a scope. This I see a lot with early career folks, right? They're writing their first couple proposals and they're proposing to just take on everything that they want to do. And that can get unwieldy and can come across as not really well integrated. At the same time, another common mistake is that something's really just too narrowly focused, right, to be exciting. So only the people who also study this one mineral in this tiny system care about the implications of your work. So there's sort of a sweet spot of too broad and too narrow. And this one sounds so obvious, but a one of the most common things is that your proposed plan that you're going to do doesn't actually address the stated goals of the project that you put up at the front, right? Somebody puts out a hypothesis and describes all this work they're going to do, but never really ties it back to what they proposed to do. So those are some common mistakes. Best practices, really quick, I would say start with a compelling introduction, draw the reader in. Remember that you're writing a proposal and not a paper. Those are two very different things. And so think about what you're trying to convey in a proposal is very different from what you're doing if you're writing a paper. Does your project involve samples that come from a place in the world? If so, you should include a map. A lot of people don't even include a map, don't know, don't lay out exactly where they're doing their work. Again, sounds simple. And then the last thing I'd say is make sure that you explain the roles of every participant. So what is each person doing? Why are they involved? And is the work that, say, an undergraduate doing, is it appropriate for an undergraduate to be doing? Is it more appropriate for a postdoc and vice versa? So that's my quick best practice spiel.
Thanks, Jen. I agree. This is something we could talk a lot about, and it's hard to succinctly think of just, what are the best tips. Is there anyone else on the panel who wants to add anything for kind of strategies or pitfalls?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Jen, excellent comments there. One thing to add is make sure you read the solicitation fully, because many times, in addition to the intellectual merit and broader impacts, which all proposals should address, there's solicitation or program specific criteria that are listed that you need to address. So make sure that you review the solicitation very thoroughly and craft your proposal around any solicitation or program specific criteria.
And maybe I can just add in one other point, I guess, to something Jen mentioned, which is if you are going to add a senior investigator onto your proposal, make sure that they are well justified as part of that proposal. I've seen proposals come through where they're sort of tacked on as maybe some gravitas for the review process, but it's really not clear what they're doing. And so I'd say just make sure that everybody in your proposal is justified and that you have a real clear description of what they're going to be doing.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Michael. Those are great suggestions. I'll move on to the next question.
Laura,
sorry,
quickly, Laura. Sorry. There was a follow-up question to one of Jen's comments in the chat regarding paper versus proposal. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I just actually typed a couple of answers to that.
Okay. I mean,
but if you want to add, please do.
Yeah. So in addition to being able to use perhaps a little bit more accessible language, as Jen said, there are a couple things. One point that I make in presentations like this is a proposal isn't just a paper that doesn't have its conclusions yet. That you should spend more time on the what one of my retired colleagues used to call the so what question. I mean, really convincing people that this is worth doing as much as that you can do it well. And the other thing that's very different about the paper versus proposal process involves what to do in the event of a decline. That resubmitting a proposal, it's less of a linear process than a paper where it's like you get something back and, well, if you fix these 3 things, it's just going to move forward to the next step and hopefully get published. When you resubmit a proposal, it's going back into, it's more of a reservoir problem and only so much is going to come out the other side. And so you don't know what your competition is going to be the next time. And it's not necessarily a matter of just, making little check boxes next to the reviewer's comments. And if I check these things, it's going to be fine. You really want to think about, what's going to make my idea more compelling and take it to the next level. So that there's some subtle differences in the revision. Thanks.
Thanks, Hedy. I see Soumaya has her hand up. So Soumaya, would you like to add?
Yeah, a quick follow-up as a general rule of thumb. A proposal is a persuasive document. It's not a treatise on the subject. So you're selling to the reader, and the reader are your peers beyond the program officers. So you have to tell a story, and a compelling story at a pace of a brisk walk, I would say, and you lead the reader at the end why the research should be funded.
Thanks, Soumaya. I think there's a couple of follow-up questions that I see coming in. And so I think I want to follow up on one of the bits of feedback that Michael provided about senior investigators. I see a question that, how does NSF view it when an early career investigator leads a big multi-PI proposal, like with 4 PIs? And so maybe, Michael, since you mentioned, senior investigators and their role in awards, maybe you'd like to take a stab at that question?
Sure, absolutely. So I think Barbara Ransom answered that in the chat, and it was a very thorough answer, I think, which is, if you're putting yourself as a lead investigator on any proposal, you need to be highly qualified and clearly the right person to lead that proposal. I actually, from a polar programs perspective, I really enjoy seeing proposals that come in with early career leads. It's something that we look at as in a way of trying to diversify our program portfolio and to move people's careers forward. But again, that person has to be the right person, and that justification has to be in the proposal to say why that investigator is the best person to lead the proposal. Seeing proposals where there's a late career person that is not really leading but is listed as the PI, that can be a flag. So again, I think just as you're putting your proposal together, get with your group, find out who is the most qualified person to lead that proposal. And if that person is early career, if that person is a person from traditionally underrepresented groups, I think that actually is it's a plus, at least in the polar programs. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate you pointing out some of the answers in the chat. It's a lot coming in to see it all, so thanks for pointing that out. I want to ask one other question that a lot of folks asked during the registration that I think is actually really important, and that is, there was a question about, folks have heard it's good to contact program officers, and we talked about that today, and there is a suggestion to send a one-page summary for the work before submitting a full proposal. And so I think it'd be good to share with the audience what they might include in such a one-pager and how it can be most helpful for a program officer. And so perhaps we could start with Soumaya.
Sure, thanks, Laura. So a one-page summary, one way to think about it, it serves two purposes, one for the PI and one for the program officer. For the PI, it's an opportunity to crystallize your research idea. And you can follow a format similar to the one that is submitted as part of an NSF proposal. It can have an overview, a description of the intellectual merits, and the broader impact. On our end, when you send a one-page summary, the program officer, what we're looking for is whether the scope of the proposed research is aligned with the description of the program, if you're targeting a specific program or a competition. Some competitions are across the directorate, and there are other examples. But I wanted to emphasize that not contacting a program officer will not alter or play any role if you send a proposal. So it's just think about it as a contact where you are making sure that the proposed research is within the scope of a specific program or competition.
Yeah, thank you, Soumaya. I appreciate that note about you don't have to submit a one-pager. Sometimes it's helpful if you're not sure if your work is a fit to a given program, but if you are, from our perspective, you don't need to get our approval, right, necessarily. So I saw, so Barbara, you have your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to just speak to the questions about writing a competitive proposal. And let me just recommend that the best way, for those of you who maybe this is your first proposal or your first couple of proposals, why don't you contact your program that you're thinking about submitting a proposal to, send them a copy of your CV, and volunteer to be a male reviewer or on a panel in those programs, because nothing helps you understand what that program considers competitive as seeing proposals that go to that proposal. Now, unless you're on a panel, and even if you are on a panel, you may not know whether that was a proposal that was successful or not, but at least you'll see them, and you'll see how those proposals and the way they're written play to the broader audience that would be the panel, if you go to a panel. And so you can say, wow, I really like the way that I really enjoyed reading that proposal, but then deconstruct it and say, why did I enjoy reading it? Or if you read a proposal and, as a reviewer, and you say, wow, that was a total bummer to read, deconstruct it and say, like, why was that a terrible proposal to read? And then don't do those things. Really, it's about experience, seeing a lot of proposals that go to the program to which you want to compete for, and sort of seeing what it is, how people talk about their research, how they structure their proposals, and that helps you get a leg up and feel much more confident about what you're going to present. The other thing is you can go to the NSF award search, as Laura was saying, and in there are lists of proposals that have been funded in that program. You can click on the thing in the Excel spreadsheet there, pull up the abstract. There's a BI, the investigator's name is on there and their contact information. Find a number of proposals that are similar to the kinds of things that you do. Contact those PIs and say, like, hey, I'm just a newbie here. This is the first time I've written a proposal for this program. You think you could send me, would we be willing to share your proposal with me just so I can see what a successful proposal looks like? And I tell you what, if you do that to 5 people, at least 3 of them will send you a copy of their proposals. So if you feel a little bit insecure about how to write a successful proposal to NSF, these are ways that you can actually reduce that anxiety level and maybe be more competitive even the first time around.
Thanks, Barbara. I want to change topic slightly, and I have a question just to give Brandon a heads up. I was going to ask Brandon this question. We talked during the presentation about the 2 merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. And a common question that I get, and I saw in some of the registration material, is whether these are weighed equally during the review process, and how much should one focus on one criteria versus the other. And Brandon, since you work across so many different programs, both research-focused programs and education and other focused programs, I thought you might be in a good position to give an initial response to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And I think you did an excellent job in your presentation and providing examples on both. And certainly the examples you provided in the broader impacts area are ones that early career scholars should pay attention to, beyond the traditional outreach or educational activities. There are a myriad of ways that you could express or have broader impacts elements in your proposals. So the same energy that you would put into your intellectual merit, for instance, collaborating with other scholars to ensure that the intellectual ideas of your proposal are of caliber. You want to put that same energy into the broader impacts. Don't necessarily think that you know what can be or should be done in the broader impacts area. You should reach out to experts. As far as the question regarding the 2 criteria, they are according to, or from the NSF's perspective, they're equally weighted, or they should be equally addressed in the proposal. I think Barbara Ransom brought up a great point about volunteering to be a reviewer or a panelist, so that you can see how those criteria are assessed, how they're written in proposals, and how they're assessed by panels, so that you can get a good idea of how maybe to do that in future proposals. Yeah.
Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate that. That's really helpful. I'm mindful we have just a couple minutes. I want to make sure we have time for the breakout rooms. We're going to have a series of breakout rooms where you'll all have an opportunity to meet in smaller groups with program officers. And I see a lot of fairly specific questions in the chat, some which are getting answered, but some which might be even program specific, like about the career program. And so I'm hoping you can continue to ask those during the breakout rooms. But I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to direct this question at Hedy. And this is also a common question about review of interdisciplinary proposals. And this kind of relates to the discussion about the one-pager and, kind of assessing program fit. What do you do if your proposed research might cross more than one program and have multiple disciplines that are important components? And so how does NSF review interdisciplinary proposals that go beyond one program? So Hedy, would you try to answer that one?
Thanks, Laura. That is a great question, and one that we get a lot, especially in my own field with oceanography, where we have some traditional disciplinary boundaries, but lots of things fall between chemical and physical oceanography or chemical and biological oceanography. My program actually co-reviews program proposals with Laura's program in hydrologic sciences. And so this is a great time to, first of all, don't worry about it. We have ways of doing these things, and we encourage interdisciplinary work, and we like to see it. This is a great example of a time when contacting with program ahead of time and saying, what do you think about the fit of, does this fit, or, do you think it falls between your program and another one? And we can help you navigate that space. Having done that, when the proposal comes in, we have all sorts of great ways in-house to work together to co-review your proposals. And if you have specific questions about that, you can always ask us. I think in the interest of time, I won't give you 7 different examples of ways we do this, but we do it all the time and it works really well. There's also, I'll make one other point, there's been kind of a long-standing urban myth, if you will, that being co-reviewed by 2 programs is double jeopardy, sort of 2 chances to get declined. There's actually plenty of evidence to suggest that it's the opposite, and really what you have is 2 bites at the apple. That co-reviewed proposals do as well or better across the foundation than things that are handled just by one program alone.
Thanks, Hedy. I appreciate you saying that, the double jeopardy question. That question comes up a lot sometimes, and I think it's good to address that, and that co-review is not necessarily put you at additional risk. So thank you for that. Do any other panelists want to make a final comment before, or respond to that question, or any others before we head off into the breakout room?
I'm just going to make a quick pitch. First of all, these are awesome because I learn something new every time I participate in one of these. So any question that you have is a great question. Second thing is, I think it's important for us to discuss how the program officer likes to deal with their workflow. And I think an email to a program officer to start off with is really a great entry point in. If you just send them out of the blue a one-pager, it's going to be a really difficult thing for them to sort of figure out what the context is. So an email, maybe a phone call, and then talk to the program officer about how they want to see their workflow proceed so that you can get the answers that you need. But as a public servant and a federal employee, it's our job to respond to you, and it's part of the job that I really love doing. So, thanks.
Thanks, Michael. I feel the same, and I think the virtual world has been hard, but one good thing is I've been able to actually, in a strange way, meet so many more investigators through Zoom, and having those one-on-one conversations that are hard if you have to travel all the way to the NSF building. So yeah, I agree. Don't be afraid to reach out to your program officers. And it's one of the joys of our job, getting to interact with investigators.